So in this assignment 2, you will be implementing a responsive web design using CSS media queries and Flexbox. So the Figma mockups are already provided to you. Let's quickly go through the mockups. So in these mockups, there are three layouts for desktop, tablet, and mobile. And on the desktop view, there is a nav bar with the logo of the company and some graphics, some title, subtitle, and learn more button. And on the tablet and mobile view also there is similar layout, but the navbar is different. It is not completely visible. It is in the collapse mode. And below the hero section, we have the newest read section, which is a card layout. And on the desktop, there are three cards in a row. And similarly, on the tablet also, there are three cards in a row. But on mobile, we can see that the layout is a bit different. So it is having a column layout. So you will need to use some flex properties maybe to design these layouts for different devices. And inside the card, if we zoom in, we have few more elements: the image for the article, the date of publish, and the title and read more link. So this is how the assignment 2 is looking. The steps to proceed with this assignment are already mentioned, and I hope you guys have already started on that. So coming to today's session, today we are going to build a responsive web page using Flexbox and media queries. So following topics will be covered in today's tutorial. So we will be designing a responsive layout using CSS media queries. Then we will understand what are selectors in CSS and how to calculate dynamic width for particular elements using CSS function and using the box shadow property. So the prerequisites for today's session are: you should be aware about basic HTML and CSS, and you should know how to create a GitHub repository. And the environment that we are going to use for today's session is VS Code, and we will be using the cloud-based VS Code, that is the code spaces, which is provided by GitHub. So as a part of designing a web page, we are going to design a responsive blog page which will make use of media queries, Flexbox layout, and the design mockup and data is provided for you. So let's go through the mockup quickly. So this is how the layout will look on mobile. It will have a page title, and it has the cards which are stacked vertically. So this is basically a column layout, you can see. And on tablet, we can see that the card layout is almost similar, but the method of rendering is different. So we can see that on the tablet, there are two cards in a row, and for desktop, it will be three cards in a row. So this is the mock data that we will be using for our today's session. So first, let's quickly recap about what is responsive design. So responsive design is an approach which ensures that our websites will look correctly and adapt to various different screen sizes, devices, and orientation. So it will optimize the user experience by making the content more visually appealing. So you can see from this image that this is some example of the mockup. So on mobile, it is vertically aligned, and when we change the device, it automatically gets aligned to some different layouts, and it gets scaled on higher devices. So there are few key principles that we should be aware about responsive web design. First is the website layout should be flexible. It should not be fixed sized, like the width should not be given in pixels. If we resize the screen, it should get scaled accordingly. Next is the flexible images. So images have their own size, and when we import the external images, they render directly if we don't specify the width and the height separately. And it might happen that the image can overflow of the screen width. So to ensure that this doesn't happen, we should be using some CSS properties. So one is the max width, that will ensure that our image is within the screen width, and other is the object fit that you might have already used in the previous lectures. So that is used to maintain the aspect ratio of the image, and it makes ensure that the image doesn't get stretched. So we will be using that today. Third thing is the media queries, which allows us to write various styles based on the layout of the device. So we can specify various device properties like width, height, and orientation, and write the styles for that particular query. Fourth is the mobile first approach. So this approach tells us that we should start designing our web page from mobile devices and then progressively enhance to the larger devices like tablet and desktop. So this approach has gained popularity because of the number of users of mobile devices compared to other devices. So the next concept is the breakpoints, that is also important in responsive web design. So breakpoints in CSS are specific points or conditions where the layout or styles of our web page are going to change and accommodate to different screen size. These breakpoints are generally used along with the media queries. So what is media query exactly? So media query is the statement that allows us to write a specific set of CSS rules when certain conditions are met. So these conditions are based on the width, height, and orientation of the device. So let's see few examples quickly. So in this example one, we have a media query which says that it should apply to the max width of 600 px. So whatever styles we will write inside this block will apply to all the devices whose width is less than or equal to 600 px. And this example tells us that we can also specify min width and max width together. So this styles will apply for all the devices whose width is between 320 px to 600 px. And third is the min width, which will apply all the styles for the devices whose width is greater than or equal to 600 px. So we can use any arbitrary width and height for defining these media queries, but there are few standard breakpoints that are generally followed based on the device types. So for mobile, the width of the device should be less than 576 px, and tablet, which is the SM device, it ranges from 576 px to 768 px, and desktop ranges from 768 to 992. And there are also higher resolution devices, which we call large desktop, whose sizes are greater than 992 px. So let's get started with the coding part. So we will be using GitHub code spaces. So we will be needing one GitHub repository. So I have already created a repository here. And to run in the code spaces, you just have to click on code and click create code space on main, which the main is the branch of our repository. Once you click that, it will open a new tab and you will get a VS Code Cloud interface, and it should load in couple of seconds. Yeah, so it is loaded, and on the left side you will see the list of files. So we are having a readme file here, and we are not going to use the terminal, so I will close it. And let's quickly write our first file, which is index.html. So we will add some basic HTML code that is required for every HTML document we write. So we declare the doc type, then the HTML tag. Inside this HTML tag, we will be having a head tag. Inside head tag, we require a title tag. And let me give the title my blog.
Hey Ashish, can you zoom in a bit?
Yeah,
A
is it
little more.
fine?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so apart from head tag, we also need a body tag. And let me add a h1 tag here, which will be the page title. And all right, so we have written the basic HTML file, and to run this file we will need some extension that is live server, and it can be found in the extensions tab. So there is the extension live server by Ritvik Day. We can install that. Yeah, once it is installed, you will see this go live option. uh, yeah, so you will see the go live option at the right bottom. You can click on this and it will start a server, and it should open in the new tab the HTML page that we just wrote. So we are able to see welcome to my blog. Now let's add some CSS styles. So we will be using external CSS file, and we will create one file which is base.css. So this base.css will contain all the code that is required to be applied to all the basic HTML tags. So this is important to be consistent across various browsers, because various browsers have their inbuilt style that is auto applied to all the tags. So for example, on this blog page, we haven't specified any font or any font size. So it is automatically given by the browser. So I will just copy these styles from the notebook and put it into this base.css file. And we can import this file using link tag. Rel should be style sheet, and href should be base.css. Yeah, so the file is loaded correctly, and we can see that the font is now changed to sans serif, and also the uh, title is centered to the page. Now the next thing we will do, we will create one more file which we will call styles.css. So in this base.css file, you can see that there is no code related to our blog page design. So we will create one more file, styles.css, to write all the application specific code. It's not a mandatory thing, but to keep things more organized and to keep our styles more organized, we can create one more file, and it can be similarly imported the way we have imported the base.css file. All right. So there is one more important tag that is required to make our web page responsive, and that tag is the meta tag, which has the proper attribute of name viewport. So we also need to add this to the head tag. All right, so we are set up with our uh, environment and the basic HTML and the files which we will be working on today. So the basic part of today's mockup is this block card, which is going to be consistent across all the layouts that we have seen in the mockup. So inside this block card, we can see that there is one image, one title, author, published date, and likes. And I'm able to see that there is some spacing around the content. So maybe I will have to use some padding left, and that needs to be applied to all the content. So that is one way. Other way I could think of this is adding one outer div which will contain the title, author, and likes. So let's add this HTML code. Let me quickly resize this a bit. All right. So let's add a div which will be our div for the block card. And inside this block card, we will require one div which will have the image for our blog. And for the title, we can use the div also, but I will use h2 because it is the second prior title after the page title. So I will give it a class name block card title. We will fill in the data shortly. And after the title, we have the author and the published date. So maybe we can put this information in a single div because it is horizontally aligned. So let me add a div for that with a class block card info. And one more div will be required for this likes count. All right. So we can wrap all these three elements inside one more div to add the spacing around them correctly. Otherwise, we will have to add the padding for each of these elements separately. So let's add a div and give it a class name, maybe block card body. Okay, and inside this image, we will be having our image tag. So image tag will have the src attribute and alternate text attribute. Okay, so now let's put some data and see how it looks. So I will just copy the data and put it in the readme file so that we can get it from here. So let's copy the title first. And put it in the alt tag as well as the title tag. Refresh this once. Sometimes it takes time. Let me try to restart this quickly. So if we disable and enable the extension, it should work. All right. Yeah, so we have loaded the title. Now let's add an image to this blog. So image link is this provided in the notebook, and add that in the SRC. So the image is loaded and the title is also loaded, but we can see that we haven't added any property for the image. So it is taking its own width and height, and it's maintaining its own aspect ratio. And we can see we discussed the key principle that the responsive design should not look like this, because we can see that the image is going out of the screen width. So for that we will need to add some styles. So let's create a style layout quickly. So first we have a block card, then we have a block card image, then we have block card body. Inside this body we have one more div, which is block card info. Okay, so we'll need to resize this image correctly so that it doesn't go outside the screen width. So for that we will be understanding the concept of selectors. So selectors in a CSS is a pattern that matches one or more elements in a document, allowing your styles to apply to only those elements. So you have already used these selectors in your previous lectures and assignments. So the three basic types of selectors are the element selector, which applies to all the HTML elements. So div, p tag, HTML body, these are the elements. So in our base.css file, we have used the element selector. So these are all the element selector, and these styles are applied to these elements. Next is the class selector that we are going to use in our styles.css file. And third is the ID selector, which begins with the hash. There are many more types of selectors in CSS. You can find it here. I have provided the link in the notebook. So the another type of selector is the child selector. So in child selector, we have to specify two things. First is the parent selector and the child selector. So that is specified using the greater than symbol. So let's try to understand this using this image. So in this image, I have a div whose selector or class is block card image. And inside that block card image, I have an image element. And there is one more image element on our web page. So if we directly apply styles to this image selector, so it will get applied to both the images, this and this. But what if I only want to apply the styles to the image which is inside a parent whose class is block card image? So for this particular use case, we can use the child selector. So the syntax for that looks like this. We have to specify the parent selector. It can be either ID selector or class selector or element selector. And same thing can be applied to the child selector. It can also be element, class or ID. So we are going to use this to style our image. So we will be using block card image greater than image. So let's add that. So we will use the object fit property cover width 100% and height, let's say 160 px. So we can see that the image is resized and it is not going outside our screen width. And also we can see that the image is not stretched. If you resize the window, you will see that it is getting scaled in and scaled out, but not getting stretched. So this is how we want our HTML image to render in a particular screen width. So let's quickly add few more styles to our block card title. We can left align the title. So for that, we can use text align left. And we can also reduce the font size a bit. That we can do using font size property. And let's make it 1.5 rem. All right. And now we can add some border to the block card. So that can be done using the shorthand property of border, whose first value is the width of the border. So we will keep it 1 px, and then the style of the border. So we want the solid border. And the third is the color. So that can be any RGB color. So let's choose some light color. So FFF stands for white. So something darker than white. Maybe let's try CCC. Yeah, so this is fine. And also let's add some border radius. To let's say 4 px. All right. So we can see that the border and border radius are added to our block card. Now we need to add some spacing here. But before adding that, let's also add the other information of the blog, the author and the published date and the likes count. So we can go here and add the author name, cotton, and let's say the published date, you can put today's date. and the likes to be, let's say, any random number 256. Okay, yeah. So the content for our first card is done. Now we need to style it more. So we will go to the styles.css, and first we will add the padding here. So let's give it a full padding from all the sides. So that can be done using the padding property, and let's give it 4px. Okay. And we can see that there is lot of space at the top of this title, and that is coming because of the h2 tag that we have used. So we can reduce that. Maybe let's make it 0 because we already have a padding here. And also let's change the bottom to, let's say, 5px, so that it's look more visually appealing. And we'll also need to add some spacing between the author and the likes. So the author and the published date information is stored in the div which is having a selector block card info. We will add a 5px margin bottom to the this div. So now it is looking fine. Maybe we can increase the font size a bit, but we want a font size which is larger than the current one but less than the title of the blog. So let's try this 1.25 rem. All right, so our block card is ready. Now we will have to make it uh, like we will have to set the max width, because we can see that it is getting scaled horizontally as I am increasing the screen width. But we want to scale it up to a particular width, and after that it should have a fixed width. So for that we will have to add a layout that is the parent component to this block card, because right now it is taking the width which is available to it, that is 100% of the screen. So we have designed the block card and it is currently looking like this. So now we will need to add some layout to this card. Right now, as you can see in the HTML file, we haven't added any parent div to this card. So let's quickly add that. So I will create one more div whose class name we can call block cards wrapper, and we will put this block card inside this. Okay. And let's define some style for this block cards wrapper. So I don't want the block card to take the complete width of which is 100%. So it should scale up to certain limit, but after that it should have a fixed width. So for that, I will have to use a max width property. And so we are designing for the mobile view first, and mobile view, the max width is 576px. So our max width should be such that it is less than 576. So I will just use 360px. Okay, and refresh the page. Yeah, so now you can see that the block card is restricted by its parent uh, component or elements max width, which is 360px. And also I want all the blocks to appear centered horizontally. So for that we can use margin left auto and margin right auto. it will auto center the block cards wrapper horizontally centered. Okay, so now let's see the device mode quickly. And if we go to 320, you can see that the card is scaling up to certain limit till 360 px, and then it will be a fixed width. So in this way, we are restricting the card width so that it looks consistent on all the devices, because we are working for a range of devices. So all devices might have different width. So our web page might not look consistent. So that is the importance of adding the max width to the wrapper. So now let's add few more block cards to see how the vertical layout looks like. For that, we will need some more data, and let me quickly see these names and grab the mock data from here. So we will be adding it at two places. One is the image alternative text attribute, and other is the block title. And also let's add the image. Okay, loaded. We add other images, title. All right, so we have all the data in place, and we can see that all the images and the title are loaded correctly. So we we want some spacing between two consecutive cards. Right now there is no spacing. So there are few various ways to add spacing between the card. The most efficient way that is used in the flex layout, and that is the gap. So let's quickly see what gap is. So gap property explicitly controls the space only between the flex items that are the children of a display flex layout. It applies that spacing between the items and not on the outer edges. So the another way to do this is the margin top. But if you apply margin top, it will also apply to the first element, and we don't want that. We only want the spacing between the consecutive elements. So that's why it's best practice to use the gap, and gap will require us to. So currently we are not using any display property for this wrapper. So let's add a display flex property, and the layout is in column format. So we will have to use flex direction column. Okay, and gap property which will be 10 px. So now you can see that our mobile view is looking nice. So it is evenly spaced, and there is no additional spacing here that is applied to the card. So if we inspect this, and we can see that there is no additional spacing applied here, and the margin or the spacing is highlighted using a color, and there is no highlight of the margin here. So that is the advantage of using gap. So we have completed our mobile view. So this is the mobile first approach, and we haven't written any additional rules that how our web page should look like on tablet and desktop devices. So it will look as it is looking on the mobile. To make it responsive to the other devices, we will have to use media queries with the breakpoints. So let's first design the tablet view. So in tablet view, we want two cards in a row. So in this case, we won't be using flex direction column. We'll have to change it to row, and also we will need some wrapping. Okay, so these are the requirements, and the spacing between the two cards horizontally and vertically should be 10 px, and all the cards should take the space exactly half of the available size. So for that, we will need to add a media query. So let's add that. So we will require min width of 576 px, right? That is the breakpoint of the tablet. And we will add the flex direction that will be row. So we will also need to add the class name here. So we can see that all the cards are coming in a single row. So to evenly space them and not to shrink them, we will have to use the property flex wrap and set it to wrap. So after adding this, now you can see that all the cards are taking the space so that they fit their content correctly. But we can see that now if we are on the, let's say, tablet device, we want two cards in a row, and it is just taking a single card in a row. That is because of the max width which is set to 360. So we will also need to modify the max width, because now for the tablet devices we have more space available on our device. So let's update the max width to maybe we can double that, because now it should be less than 991 px, which is the boundary of the tablet device. So let's make it 720 px. Okay. And so still it will not work because we haven't specified any width to the block card, and block card is still taking the complete width. So we'll have to add a property to the block card to uh, let the block card know how much width it should take so that it can fit two in a row. So we can add this property again using the media query, and we can put the block card class inside this media query, and let's add a width of, let's say, 50%. Okay, so we can see that still it is not showing two in a row. So the reason behind this is we will have to check if 50% of the available width is available for the card or not. So let's understand the concept here. So we want two cards in a row, and there is already a gap of 10 px between the two cards, and each card has a border on the left and the right side, and the border width is 1 px. So in total 10 px is gone from 100%, and compute like so in total for the border is taking 4 px. So the actual available width is 100% minus 10 px for the gap and 4 px for the border. So that much width is available, and that needs to be divided into 2. And if we give that, then only the cards will show 2 in a row. So how to do this? So in CSS, there is a way to calculate the width or any other property, and that is done by using the calc function. So calc function is used to perform mathematical calculations to determine the value of a particular CSS property. So it is used to calculate the values dynamically, and it is allows us to make more flexible layouts, and even if we resize the screen, it will automatically recalculate the values and apply it to the elements. So to do that, we will have to use the width property and the calc function. So inside the calc function, we will put the calculation that we want to do. So out of 100%, 10 px is for gap and 4 px is for border, and the remaining width we will divide into two parts. Two because we want to show two cards in a row. So let me add this width to this block card inside this media query. So we can see that the block page is looking correctly on the tablet device, and from 576 it should change to tablet view, and below that it is still taking the column layout that is expected from the mockup. So you can see that by writing just 3 lines of code here and 1 line of code here, we were able to make our web page responsive for tablet. Now similar thing we will have to do for desktop. So for desktop, so this is the formula that we can use in general to calculate the width of the card. So here 100% is the total space in width available, and n minus 1, where n is the number of cards we want to show in a row, and gap is 10 px in our case, minus 2 into n. So n is again the number of cards, and 2 represents the border on the left and the right side. So if we put 2 in this formula, we will get the same expression. So for desktop view, we want to show 3 cards in a row. So for showing the 3 cards, we will have to again calculate the width by substituting n is equal to 3. So let's understand again how it is done. So this is the 100% width which is available. Out of that, There are two gaps because we have three cards in a row. So there will be two gaps, 10 px each. So in total, gap is taking 20 px space, and border left and border right 2 px per card. So in total, we will have to subtract 20 px and 6 px, and then divide the remaining space into three parts. So this is how the blog page will become responsive for desktop. Let's try to quickly add this. So for desktop now we have larger screen width. So we can change this 720 px to maybe some more device, because now we have space uh, till 991 px. So I will copy this media query and change the minimum width to 991 px, which is the starting, sorry, 992 px, which is the starting point for the uh, uh, desktop devices, and put the blocks card starter. And we can see that these two properties, we don't need to again copy that, because on the desktop view itself we will be requiring the row flex direction, and we want them to wrap. The only property that we need to change is the max width, because we now want three cards in a row. So let's copy only the max width and add that here, and let's say we make it 960 px. And similar thing, we will have to add a media query for the block card. So here the minimum width will be 992 px, and the width will be 20 100% minus 20 px minus 6 px divided by 3. So if we go to 992 px, we can see that now three cards are shown in a row. So this has made our web page fully responsive for mobile, tablet, and desktop. And if you want to make it more responsive by making use of the screen width of the higher devices, you can add the you can add more media queries, and can make that more responsive for the higher devices. So you can see that we have added less than 60 lines of code CSS and have created a responsive block page design. So now let's understand some other properties of CSS for adding the hover styles. So suppose we want to add some hover styles to the card. So right now, if we hover using the mouse over this card, it is not changing the style. But let's say we want to add some shadow to the card and also want to change the cursor of this card. So how can we do that? So for that, CSS provides some pseudo classes. So the one example of pseudo class is the hover. So to add styles to the pseudo class, we have to use the selector colon and the pseudo class name. So for the block card, we will be using the hover pseudo class, and let's try to add that. We can add it here, and add cursor pointer. Now you can see that the default pointer device is the arrow, and when I hover any card, it is showing me the pointer device. So in the similar way, we want to add some shadow to the card to indicate that the mouse is over that particular card. So for doing that, we have a box shadow property in CSS. So the way of specifying the box shadow is in this way. So it accepts 5 parameters. First is the offset X, second is offset Y, third is the blur, spread, and last is the color. So offset X means how you want to position your shadow. If you specify some positive value here, the shadow will shift to the right side. And if you specify negative value, it will shift to the left. Same thing applies for offset Y. If you specify positive value, it is going to shift downwards. And if you specify negative value, it is going to shift upwards. There are few more properties of the shadow. One is blur, spread, and the color of the shadow. So you can check this out. Uh, I have provided a link here which specifies some more properties and how specifying these different values, how the shadow changes. So you can play around with that. For now, we will use this shadow property and add it into the hover style. So you can see that, let me zoom in a bit. So you can see that there is a shadow here which appears when we hover over the card. So in this way, we can also change the background color of the card if we want to hover. Also, we can change the font size, all the colors and font size can be altered here if we want to do that on hover. All right, so that's the end of the session. Let's conclude. So in this tutorial, we learned how to create the responsive web page by just writing less than 60 lines of CSS code, and we learned how to use calc function in CSS to compute the width dynamically for our block card, and we also use the object fit property so that the block images are not stretched. We also learned the child selectors. If we want to apply styles to a particular element inside a particular selector, that can be done using child selector. There are few more child selector that you can check. I have provided the link, and also we learned how to add a shadow to the card using the pseudo class hover. So few tips that you should keep in mind. So don't create unnecessary HTML tags and try to design the web page with the minimum tags. And same thing applies for the CSS properties. Don't add unnecessary CSS properties. Check if the display flex is whether really required or not. If it is required, then only add. Otherwise, it will become very hard to scale on various devices. And lastly, use meaningful class names to make it human readable and signify what they are doing. So if you look to the class names that we have used, so all have a meaning to what element they are representing on our HTML page.